Hello. It is I, Antonia Dodge, with Beatrice Chestnut. And we have been hard at work. I think we've probably recorded approximately, I don't know, anywhere between 15 and 20 hours of content in the last few days, which is insane, by the way. You can kind of get a sneak peek at our little makeshift. You can kind of see like the lights and our sort of makeshift, there's Joel, production studio. Anyway, so as promised, and the reason why we haven't done it sooner is because we've, as mentioned, been hard at work in creating the content. Yeah. But I did mention that we would be answering a few of the questions that you guys wrote in, and you wrote most of them in the Intuitive Awakening closed Facebook group and not in the Personality Hacker open page. So I'm going to the Intuitive Awakening Facebook group to answer the questions, and then I'll cross-post this over into Intuitive Awakening. All right, so by the way, Beatrice, how's it been going?
It's been going great. I love being here with Antonia and Joel. It's been really, really fun. They've been amazing in terms of just inviting me into their home and into all the incredible work they're doing. So it's been a really amazing experience being here with them and talking about personality with them and creating this new program that we're really excited about.
All right, so I'll give you the $20 later for saying such nice things. And in the meantime, what we're going to do is answer some of these questions. Actually, it's been super awesome.
She's been saying good things about you.
She's totally saying
it's been amazing. It's been great. I'm very impressed with these guys. They're doing amazing work.
Yeah, there you go. There's an extra 5 on top of it. All right. So basically, people say they have tons of questions, but let's just start from the top. One person, Tammy, asks, how would sexual social differ from social sexual?
So that's a good question, but I really want to say first and foremost that it depends on what type we're talking about, because the sequence of social, sexual, or sexual, social, it really depends on how it will show up. Will depend a lot on what type you are. So overall, we can say some things, but I don't think we can say too much unless we know what type we're talking about. Overall, in general, but we need to be careful not to be too general, I think social first, the person's going to have much more of a sense of the group, of causes, of being oriented toward having what their reputation is in groups. They'll be more politically savvy, whereas sexual first is someone who's really more interested in one-on-one relationships, who has more energy and intensity around interpersonal bonding, and is, can be more angry depending on what type we're talking about, but overall has kind of some more intensity that goes often into relationship. But again, I want to really, really emphasize that the subtype sequences can really shift and change the way they show up can shift and change depending on what type we're talking about. So that always needs to be taken into account, which is why I'm so interested in the subtypes, because it talks about the alchemy between these sequences and particular types. And I think that's what's even more interesting than what happens when one is dominant and one is repressed. Although that's also really interesting to me as well.
Yeah, I think that's probably the number one. I'm shifting arms because my arm got tired. I think that's one of the number one. I'm going to scoot a little closer to you. I'm sorry. My arm is like super tired just holding this. So I'm going to go like this. This will be easier. That is one of the number one things that I have learned listening in on these many, many hours of content is that I used to think that it was finding your type, right, of the 9, and then discovering your instinctive, well, I'm not sure if you call them instinctive variant, but your instinct, and then going 1 + 1 = 2. Right. But now that I've been listening into all of this content, it doesn't work like that at all. It's actually the passion of your dominant type alchemized, like you mentioned, with the instinct, and then that creates a completely new subtype, meaning that it's actually the relationship, the alchemical relationship between those two components that create the subtypes, which is why it's almost like you can't separate them. There'll be like a little bit of characteristics that will, come through each of the instincts, but the reality is that, especially as I was listening in on 6, it actually goes in the reverse for 6. It's like, because 6 is all about fear, fear,
Right.
then what ends up happening is it actually ends up that you're going away from the passion of fear, goes away from the sexual or the social or the self-preservation.
Right.
So you actually almost like that's a countertype with all three, even though I know that that's not accurate,
Right.
but
Right.
that's what it feels like to me. So one of the major ahas that has come out of this for me listening in on this content is that it's not a 1+1. It's not find your type and then find your instinct.
Right.
It's actually like multiply the passion with the instinct, and then that creates a whole new subtype, which is why the subtypes are so fascinating.
Right.
Yeah. So like I understand when you're like, what's the difference between SOSX versus SXSO? And it's like, it kind of depends on the type.
Right.
You have to know the type in order to know the answer to that question, which is like a really brand new aha for me in Enneagram. So thank you, by the way, for that massive aha.
Sure. Thanks for being so clear about that aha. I think that's exactly the feeling I had when I learned this approach to the subtypes.
So Justin asked like a whole bunch of questions. Unfortunately, we only have time to answer one. And the top one is, why does society blame anger users, so 8-9-1s, but feel sorry for the 2-3-4s and actively protects the 5, 6, and 7s? More to the point, why is it okay to expect anger users to get self-control when I don't see or feel that for the other types?
So I really like this question of Justin's because I do think that there's a way that we have kind of a cultural idea that anger's bad. When really anger is not any worse or better than any of the other emotions like grief or shame or fear. And so I really get what he's saying. I think that often people do have some sort of negative projection onto someone who has anger as one of their central personality traits. And really, I think it's important to notice that bias and recognize that there's nothing essentially wrong with anger, especially in the Enneagram system. It's just important to know what feeling has a lot to do with shaping how your patterns show up. And so it's really important for us to recognize our own biases around anger and not say that, okay, angry people need to control themselves. Well, maybe sometimes they do, but maybe sometimes fearful people also need to manage their fear, as well as people who can get stuck or over-identified with their grief might need to work on and moderate that. So I really like the essence of Justin's question and the point that he's making about how sometimes just because of cultural things or personal things, we kind of tend to see certain emotions in certain people who, have that emotion, display that emotion more than others as somehow bad or wrong or in need of controlling themselves, because I don't think that's true. And by the way, I think this is why some 8s really get stereotyped in negative ways, or sexual 4s, types that tend to display more anger. A lot of negative stuff gets projected onto them that's sort of not fair, because these are all just personality patterns and defensive structures, and none of them is any worse or better than any of the others. And so I like that question because I think it gives me an opportunity to say all that.
Yeah, well, and I wonder if there's like a gender split here too, because it almost feels like anger is unacceptable for women, but totally acceptable for men. It feels like anger is one of the few emotions that men will allow themselves to feel. So I think that's now getting, that didn't answer the question, but it's now getting my wheels spinning around what is acceptable emotional displays and what's not. That is a really good question, though. Yeah. So one person mentioned anything you can say about 4s and growth. Now, I just sat through a whole session that we just recorded on 4s and the 4 subtypes and the growth for them, but is there like maybe just one nugget that you could give about, and I'm also letting you know that this entire program is going to be available in October, so if you want to deep dive into this, it will be available then. But in the meantime, let's give them like a nugget of growth for 4.
So my favorite new insight that I've really had about 4s and their growth, and by the way, this comes from my good friend and teaching partner, Uranio Pius. He pointed out recently that 4s have a real problem sometimes when they're happy, and that a big growth edge for 4s can be actually letting in happiness. and letting in the good stuff. And there can be habitual ways that they get over-identified with sadness or having things be difficult or their own sense of lack. And it can be kind of a problem for them if they're actually happy and really good things are happening. And it's actually been kind of funny when we've had experiences and workshops where we talk about this, and when we're working with fours in their growth and they're doing the inner work, and they get to this point where they have to kind of take in the fact that actually things are going really well. And Iranio at one point said, wow, it's a real problem for you that you're so happy. That was really a beautiful new learning for me, that it's really true, and that I think it can be a wonderful thing to see a four doing the work of actually letting themselves be happy and own good things that are happening to them.
So another person asked about instinctive blindness, and once again, in the question, Farima asked it. In the question, I just want to reiterate, it's not about taking the instincts and looking at them separately. All of the instincts, like their relationship to the passion of the type, is super important. So when you ask about, she's talking about instinctive variant blindness. So I would imagine that'd be like the third on your stack. So like
repressed instinct?
The repressed instinct. She said you don't really talk about that much in your book. But we have talked a little bit about it in this course. I've been listening to you talk about that. And what I've picked up, and I want you to take the ball, but what I picked up is that it's generally the thing that you need to integrate. But again, it's not just the instinct, it's the specific instinct associated with your type. So for me, I'm a 3 sexual with self-preservation as my auxiliary or my secondary, and my social is my inferior. And it's not social that I need to integrate, it's 3 social that I need to integrate. Is that accurate?
That's true. That's true. And again, you can think of it both ways. It's just important not to overdo doing too much instinctual work without taking into account your type. So the main thing here is that, yes, I didn't write about it much in my book, but I'm definitely talking about it a lot more, and there's a lot about it in this program, that we need to think about our instinctual, what I'm calling the instinctual sequence. What's dominant? What do we tend to overdo? In other words, mine is self-pres. I overdo self-pres. I'm kind of thinking more, overdoing self-pres when I don't really need to be self-pres oriented. Social second for me, and then sexual is third for me. And so, yes, the repressed instinct, and I say repressed very intentionally because these are biological energies, and if it's a blind spot, it's not that we just don't see it, it's that we're pushing it away. But usually that's something we kind of gave up on. It's just territory we underdo, we don't give enough attention to. And so all 3 are important, and the sequence are important, and I think it's a dynamic, energetic connection between the 3 of them. And I think it's important to work on all 3. But in my view, the first thing we need to do is get a real handle on the dominant one, because we are overdoing it, and it often takes such a big amount of space in our experience. So that I think is really important. But of course, as we work on the first one, the second one will come up, and issues around that will come up. And then absolutely we also need to work on what we sort of don't look at and what gets left out, which is our repressed, or our third.
Somebody asked, what's the best way to leverage Enneagram for personal growth? And that is a can of worms, my friend, because I just sat through many hours of content, and I don't know if I could give you just one. Beatrice in her program goes through not just how the instincts influence the type and the subtypes, and she gives best tips for every single subtype in their growth. She also talks about the wings and how the wings show up in growth, and the arrow lines and how they show up in growth, and it's an enormous topic. So I don't know if I could just give one, but I will say Enneagram is incredibly powerful for growth. If there's one, you can think of one. Oh, awareness. Sorry,
yes.
I was going to say.
It's really all about growth. I mean, the Enneagram, the whole point of the Enneagram is about growth and development. It's not just about finding your type and talking about what type you are. It's about how do you use knowledge of your type as a jumping off point for growth. And I think certainly getting in touch with your type patterns and, the blind spots associated with your type, that's like the number one key piece, and you could spend years just on that. But there's other things too, like subtype patterns, again, which are more specific, more nuanced, more unique things that you do that maybe other people of your same type don't do. And then they're also using the arrow lines for movement and as developmental opportunities, and using your wing points as developmental opportunities. And by the way, I think wings are more than anything else developmental opportunities. They're not so much subtypes in and of themselves the way we often talk about it. So I think while wings flavor our main type, I don't think there's like a static list of traits that's true for everyone. So not every 2 has the same influence of 1 and 3. I think we have both, and I think they're both available to us as ways of stretching ourselves.
That was one of the most interesting things that has come out of this for me, is recognizing that the wings are not subtypes. I'm not like a 3-wing 4 or a 3-wing 2, and those 2 are different subtypes. Mm-hmm. The subtypes are that I'm a sexual subtype. Mm-hmm. And that the wings, both like you said, influence me, and that they're developmental opportunities, not part of necessarily the personality characteristics, which was a big aha for me, or at least in the methodology that you use. I know other people have different methodology, but having talked to Beatrice for the last 4 days and knowing she's a psychoanalyst and has been like doing coaching, and not just coaching, but like actual therapy using this for like many, many years, I have a tendency to trust what Beatrice says. So I'm going to default to Beatrice's opinions because she knows her shit. Yeah. All right. So another person asked how you know the difference between an 8, if I'm an 8 or a 1.
If you're an 8 or a 1. Well, there's a few things. One thing is 1s tend to follow the rules and 8s tend to break them. So 1s are sort of over social. They're very concerned about social convention. 8s kind of go against social convention. Another thing is they both have access to anger, but they experience it differently. 8s tend to feel a little bit more free with their anger. They experience it as energy, and they're usually, I wouldn't say 8s are always angry at all. Sometimes they get stereotyped that way, but they're a little bit easier with anger. They can share it, and they don't necessarily feel bad about it. 1s tend to think anger is bad, and so tend to control it or over-control it, unless they're a sexual 1, in which case they are more free with it. But they also tend to get angry about different things. So it kind of depends on where your anger goes and what it's about. I think those are sort of different things, but especially the ones, there's a difference between being over social and under social, following the rules and breaking the rules.
Well, and if you want to know what the subtypes look like, the 3-8 subtypes and the 3-1 subtypes, which actually look very, I'm starting to recognize just how differently people look depending upon their subtype.
Right.
In the same type, people can show up in radically different ways depending upon what their subtype is. So I recommend grabbing Beatrice's book. And if you haven't gotten a copy so far, she also has a really cool small book that doesn't go into as much depth, but does a highlight overview. So either one of those is great. But her book, The Complete Enneagram, is amazing. And go read the subtypes and determine which one sounds the most like you. Oh, it looks like this, which is probably going to be backwards. But
thanks for the plug.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I always plug your book. Your book is amazing. And then the last question is a controversial question, but we won't make it controversial because she's a 2 and I'm a 3. So we need people like us. So we won't be super controversial. But what is your opinion of tritypes, Beatrice?
Okay, I know that tritypes are a big topic, and this is just my opinion. It's just my sense of it. I learned trifix from Echazo, and so I think there's something in it. However, I find that, at least for me, it serves as a bit of a distraction. I think you could spend your whole life working on your type and your subtype, and I think sometimes what I see people do is outsourcing what really belongs to their main type and their ego inner work about their main type. They outsource it to one of their other tritype types. So in other words, I'm a 2, but I did that because I've got 7 in my tritype. Well, maybe that's actually a 2 thing that you don't want to fully own. So I find that for myself, and again, this is based on my own experience and the people I've worked with as a therapist, I find that there's just so much to work with in terms of type and subtype and the arrow lines. Those are the things I use most around growth and development. And I find that tritype, while there's something in it, I'm sure, for me ends up being kind of a distraction from doing the real inner work, the depth work with the main type. And I see people tossing it around a lot, and it just seems like there's so many numbers, there's so many things to think about that I think for me, that makes it hard to really dig into what do I really need to face in terms of being a 2? What do I really need to face? And it's just too tempting for me to outsource something that I might want to see as a different type. And so for me, I don't tend to work with Tritype. I tend to prefer really digging in deeply into the type and all the things it says about type and the subtype, which I think is really, really important and the most important way of understanding why 2 people of the same type differ, I think, more than wings.
Yeah, well, and I was, sorry, I didn't mean to,
No,
are you complete?
No,
because
yeah, complete.
You're the person who needs to be talking right now.
No.
But I'm always talking, so I'm probably just going to jump in anyway.
Please do.
So one of the things that I picked up, and especially with this concept that the Tritype could be distracting, is that, first of all, when we get into typology, and this is one of the reasons why we love Beatrice and so much wanted her to be the person who taught our first Enneagram course, because she's super into personal development. This is not about just diving deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into some sort of model that you can perpetually unpack and perpetually go down the rabbit's hole of. It's specifically using it as a tool for development and growth. So it's not just like making love to a model, it's actually utilizing the model in the best way possible, which is for development and becoming the best version of yourself. And one of the things that I really picked up from observing all of this content that she's been teaching is that when you become the best version of your type, you actually transcend it. Mm-hmm. And then now you're free to move around the entire Enneagram. So your Tritype almost kind of doesn't matter, because eventually once you do the ego work of your subtype, of your type and subtype, once you actually master the ego work there, you are now way more free to fluidly move around the Enneagram itself. It's like you did your ego transcendence work, and now you've got access to all of the 9 types, which is effectively sort of the goal, if I'm not mistaken. Is that accurate?
I think so. I think once you really loosen your own ego structures, which, by the way, can take a long time, I think, yeah, the whole point is that the Enneagram is a model of wholeness, and that we want to borrow and adopt and integrate strategies of different types. So again, I think when people do that, that's fine. I just think that there's so much work to be done on our egos, and our egos are kind of tricky in the ways that they try to get away from really doing the work that we need to do. And I'm so dedicated to using the Enneagram in the ways I think really help people and that really help me. And so I just find that really focusing in on the main type and again, the subtype, which I think adds that instinctual focus, which is all important. That's what's really, really opened up my work, and that's what's been beneficial for me and my clients. And so I get a little bit worried when we're throwing out so many numbers. You know, it's like if I'm a 271, how do I know if it's my 2 or my 7 or my 1? How do I know if it's my 1 wing or my 1 trit? I mean, again, to me, it clouds the picture that should be clear enough to really allow us to use the Enneagram to really, really do the deep work that we need to do to get where we want to go.
I think I feel really similarly in Myers-Briggs, where people want to talk about the shadow functions, the 4 cognitive functions that are in your stack.
Right.
And that's a super interesting, and there's totally something there.
Right.
John Beebe's model is amazing. There's totally something there, like you talk about with the trifects.
Yeah.
There's something there, and also most of us aren't ready to dive in there. Right. Most of us still have work to do in our type dynamics within our function stack. So it's not like it's wrong to go there,
right.
and it's not like there isn't really cool stuff there.
Right, I'm sure there is.
Yeah, it's just a question of like, when you're using it for development and growth, the number one question you should be asking yourself, I think at this stage is it helping your development and growth? Are you ready for that phase? Or is it a distraction because the model is so fascinating that it's almost like it's no longer becoming a tool for development, which it doesn't have to be. Not everybody has to use these models for development.
Right. Absolutely.
But the school of thought we come from is that why wouldn't you use them that way?
Right.
So for us, in the Myers-Briggs level with the shadow processes, and for you in the trifects or the tritypes, it's kind of like, well, you might be ready for that, and if you are, you're probably a pretty transcendent person, so this might not be the place to get your information. I don't know. So anyway, One more thing that somebody mentioned, and I just want to hint at it, is that yes, there has been an interesting conversation going on between us and Beatrice about the possibility of a merger between Enneagram and Myers-Briggs, which I don't think has been done very well yet.
Not
so
yet.
she's got that deep dive on the subtypes. We've got the deep dive on the cognitive functions. So we're talking about doing a Vulcan mind meld at some point and coming up with, of course, a growth-oriented model that would merge the two models and see what we can come up with.
Yes,
So
I'm very excited about that. And just, I've been learning so much from you guys and so much about, you know, I'm not an expert in Myers-Briggs, but I really, really want to learn about it. And I think there are some really interesting connections and overlaps. And I'm thrilled to be exploring that with you.
do you see like this like absolute flood of like thumbs up and heart signs that just
Yeah.
went by when we talked about the possibility of merging these two? I think the type community is like super hungry for it.
Yeah.
So, and I think we could do it okay.
Oh, yeah, I think there's some really interesting work to be done there.
Yep. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys, for joining us on the live. Look out for all the marketing materials. We'll be letting you know what's going on with what we're looking at is a tentative October 2nd release for the Enneagram program. It's called Enneagram Roadmap, and it's going to be amazing. And I know that because I just listened to the entire thing be recorded, and it was amazeballs, and I got all these ahas. So thank you so much for joining us. Look out for all that content and information, and we will talk to you another time. Peace.
Thank you.